Good morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Spring Forum 2025 edition at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Every day, the news is filled with stories of extreme weather that threatens our cities, our health, and our futures. Just as World War II raised an existential threat that united Americans in a common cause, the dangers of climate change are similarly challenging all of our previously held notions of the future. How can we unite to take action, as we did during the war effort before it is too late? Tom Steyer has been on the forefront of the climate war for well over a decade, leveraging his investment expertise, business knowledge, and community organizing skills to support sustainable climate solutions. He's the founder and co-executive chair of Galvanize Climate Solutions, a climate-focused global investment firm. He played a key role in preserving California's Global Warming Solutions Act, while also working to pass clean energy initiatives and advocate for environmental justice across the country. He co-founded Beneficial State Bank, a triple bottom line community development bank focused on justice and sustainability, and Tomcat Ranch, a regenerative ranch dedicated to raising cattle with a negative carbon footprint. In 2013, he founded Next Gen America, the largest youth voter engagement organization in American history. He was a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate with a campaign centered on addressing climate change. In addition, he co-chaired Vice President Biden's Climate Engagement Advisory Council to help mobilize climate voters. In his first book, Cheaper, Faster, Better: How We'll Win the Climate War, he tells his own story of coming to understand the urgency of climate action, and he showcases the inspiring work of people on the front lines whose innovative approaches provide hope for meaningful change. Today, we're going to be talking about why immediate action on the climate front will not only be our key to a healthy and viable future, but also an investment in the future of our economy. Tom, thanks so much for joining me today. We're so glad to have you back.
Malcolm, it's so great to be here.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to tell you how much I appreciated reading your book. I found it just a very hopeful experience. I think oftentimes when I'm reading things about climate, there's a kind of cloud that I feel is gathering over me. And this one was definitely showing me a lot of signs of hope. I also liked it especially because in my interactions with young people, your encouragement for people to be on the climate change team, no matter what different level, how dedicated you are. But for young people, there really are opportunities to have climate careers. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just how things look different for young people today than they did when you and I were young.
Well, that hurts a lot. Let me say, I have talked at 3 universities in the last month, and I have scheduled to talk at a bunch more in the spring. So I get a chance to talk to people between the ages of 18 and 25. Plus, Kat and I have 4 kids between the ages of 31 and 36. So we get a chance to hear what they and their friends have to say. And the biggest change that I see in their generation different from ours is I think we were much less aware of the future. As an American growing up in the 60s and 70s, I think even though in some ways those were tough times, and we went through the Vietnam War and we went through the Civil Rights Revolution and a whole bunch of hard times, I never really had any sense that the country wasn't progressing and that we weren't on an upward trajectory, or any sense that we weren't going to improve and that we were working together to build something. And I think that is something that I hear differently sometimes from young people. The whole question about having kids. Do I want to have kids? Do I want to bring kids into this world? I don't think anyone in our generation, I never heard that from my friends, ever. I've heard that from some of my kids, and I've certainly heard it from other young people who I work with who've said to me, I don't feel that's appropriate in this world. And I've always said, okay, I completely disagree. Let's talk about it. We have to be optimistic. We are going to build a much better world, and we have to believe that, but it's also true. And so one of the things I noticed being on college campuses at the age of 67, I am much more optimistic than some of the people who are 20.
Yeah, that's what I liked about the book too. And it's a reminder too that, I mean, you may have the child who makes the biggest breakthrough in climate change of ever. You know, so there's that human potential that each person has within them too. And I love that part of it. You know, there's so much. I mean, in some ways, I enjoyed reading the book. When it first came out, I read it quickly, and then I've been studying it in the last 3 weeks because I knew you were coming. But it's in a way, it's almost a window on a world that's already changed. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the changes we have in the new presidential administration, and just how, what bearing does that have on this?
So let me take one step back, and I will answer that question. But I want to say that in this audience are my wife, my former business partner, my former next door neighbor, a former trustee with me of Grace Cathedral, plus my priest. So I have to be very careful here in what I say. But a lot of people who I'm very close to. When I wrote the book, the idea that I was making an argument that the way that we would win this was by producing cheaper and better products that everybody would move to was not the argument that people wanted to hear in the United States, because we were talking about the natural world. We were talking about temperature, we were talking about storms, fires, sea rise, and the problems that those were going to cause for human beings, which is true and which is super important. And I can bore you with the details on that if you so choose. I'm obsessed with it. But what I was trying to say is the way we're going to solve this is not by dwelling on that, but by producing things that are cheaper, faster, and better. And that we're going to do it, and it's going to be disruptive, and it's going to be overwhelming, and we're going to go into the traditional S-curves from Silicon Valley, where it's very hard to sell them, and then that's the only thing that people buy. And that is the way that we're going to change this world, and so we should focus on succeeding in doing that. And this was at a time when that isn't the way people talked about climate, but I'm a professional investor for 40 years, and I was looking at it, and I can talk to you about the details of what it costs per kilowatt hour of every single one of the ways of generating electricity, and why some are going to be better than others. Obviously, when the new Republican administration came in, with Republicans controlling both houses of Congress and at some level controlling the Supreme Court, the ability to talk about this in the way of the natural world, which is totally relevant, kind of went away, if you'll excuse my saying so. That is something that, for whatever reason, people can't hear. Now, the only thing people can hear right now, saying this in church, is money. And if you can't talk about money, you can't be heard. That's not the way it should be, and we should talk about what that says about our society. But that is where we are. And so in this world, I feel like what I was trying to say a year ago is now more relevant. If we can talk about this too, but very few people who actually live that world are willing to talk about it anymore. I could take it through all the people who used to talk about this who now have never heard of it and would deny it. And so as we talk about how this is going to change, hopefully we'll this morning I'll get a chance to talk about how the actual economic world is working at a time when the political world and the discourse are, in my mind, disconnected from reality. But reality has a way of asserting itself, and so I think reality will win. But in the meantime, there's a lot of noise at this level, at the same time that at the real level of people making, buying, and using things, the transition, the revolution keeps happening.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about oil and gas subsidies, what is President Trump talking about when he it talks about oil and gas? Why are we having plastic straws being mandated for federal employees? That kind of stuff. I just don't understand that.
So let's talk a little bit about oil and gas. So this, when I first came out of college, I worked for Morgan Stanley in the merger department, and we basically did a whole bunch of oil deals. So I've been following the oil market for a very, very long time. Obviously, this administration's mantra is drill, baby, drill. we need to produce as much oil and gas as possible. That's our future. That's how we dominate energy markets around the world. So let's just talk about some of the numbers. I hate to bore you about numbers, but I'm about to. The world produces 102 million barrels of oil a day. That's what we produce. The United States of America is the biggest producer by far. We produce 13.5 million barrels a day. If we do everything that the administration wants, we will go from 13.5 million barrels a day to 14. No big deal. The United States is a high-cost producer of oil. And part of that is just because, you know what? We've been producing oil for a long time. So all the cheap places are gone. So if you look at the oil we produce, it kind of has a break even of somewhere between around $50. If you look at the Persian Gulf, they have a break even between $8 and $12. So as we go forward, the question is, are people going to demand more oil or less oil? So 60% of oil use is cars, transportation, people who need to get to work in the morning. That's what that 60% of that 102 million barrels is for cars. So are people going to keep driving cars? Seems like. Are they going to be driven by gasoline? Seems like not. So when you look at what's going on in terms of vehicle sales, the United States, last year, EVs went up by 9%. In Europe, 25%. In China, it was like 50%. If you look at China, the biggest car market in the world, over 80% of new cars are EVs or plug-in hybrids. If you look at Europe, this is an incredibly fast trend. China is producing $12,000 plug-in hybrids that go 2,000 miles on a charge. 12 grand, and the price goes down 1% a month. You think that's a disruptive vehicle? So what we're seeing is, do I believe that 60%, it takes people that, we don't scrap every internal combustion engine because there's an existing set of cars. The new cars are increasingly going to be EVs or plug-in hybrids, and after a while, we'll get rid of the internal combustion engines. Natural gas. So there's a lot of talk about natural gas. It's oil and gas. Natural gas is supposed to be the bridge fuel. We move from coal to renewables, and the bridge is supposed to be natural gas. You could go into a lot of things, but first of all, it's supposed to be half as bad as coal. Actually, in the real world, it's almost exactly as bad as coal. There's a lot of talk about how it isn't, but all of the research says it's about as bad on an emissions basis as coal. We're building enough liquefied natural gas terminals in Louisiana and Texas to basically to send to basically Europe, to double Europe's emissions. Okay, what's that look like in the real world? Liquefied natural gas costs 60% more than coal, and it's just about as dirty. It's not going to get cheaper.
Yeah, and what you've explained in the book is part of it is having to do with leaks. Like,
yes.
So leaks are an enormous source of climate change gas.
It is, but what I'm saying is, yes, from an environmental standpoint, it's terrible. But from an economic standpoint, it's terrible. Who wants to spend 60% more? What we're going to have is really cheap, really abundant, clean fuel. It's just money. It's going to be cheaper. Last year, globally, over 90% of new electricity generation, so new power plants, were renewable. Why? It's cheaper. So, no one is being nice.
So why is the Republican Party turning its back on free market economics?
That's the point. No, that is the point. Why would we not go for the money? The future is in the new technologies. The future is always in the new technologies. This is not like a new thing like, we should really stick with whale blubber. That's the future. It's not the future. The future is in new technologies. So why would you be drill, baby, drill? Politics.
Yeah.
It's who who does this administration, who are they aligned with? And who, what is the place where their bread is buttered? As far as I'm concerned, this is not going to change anything. Just to be clear, the state that has the most renewables as a percentage and in absolute terms in the United States of America is Texas. Texas. They have so much more than California. Why? They basically do what's cheap. They talk about fossil fuels all the time. They're the fossil fuel capital of the country. They really are. Chevron, which is originally an oil company from California, moved to Houston. It is the center of oil and gas, but they've tripled their solar in the last 3 years. They have more wind by far than anybody else. Why? It's cheap. They are basically just doing business. Business is not going to stop because people talk. People are still going to run the numbers. And when you run the numbers, you don't buy really expensive stuff in a commodity. And what we're going to see is every technology is going to get cheaper by a lot. All these things, wind, solar, batteries, EVs, are down 80% in cost over the last decade. They'll go down another 80%. You're going to have very, very cheap, abundant energy. People act as if we're going to have shortages, that it's going to be expensive. It's not. That's just not true. We are going to have very, very cheap, very abundant energy, and we are going to have new things that are so much better. And the idea that we're stuck in the 1950s, I always say to people, we're not going back to caddies with tail fins. That is not our future. Mm-hmm. Certainly not the future of the world.
So Elon Musk has been dismantling so much of the federal government. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, certainly he knows about this, this dynamic with regard to energy. What do you see taking place as you read about headlines about the USAID or about the Department of Education or, the other major cuts in the IRS, et cetera?
Well, I think let's take a step back about what is going on in terms of how Americans feel about their government. And this is not talking about Republicans or Democrats. This is just talking about Americans. And Americans in general, because when I travel around this country, it really doesn't matter who you're affiliated with. Everyone is mad at the government. Everybody feels disconnected from the government. Everybody feels like the government is serving somebody besides them. And they're really mad. And that is not a partisan issue. And so what this administration tapped into was that really deep anger at what are perceived as the self-interested, corrupt elites in our country. And people are just mad. And so, do people think the government is serving someone besides them? Yes. Do they think the press is not telling the truth? Yes. Do they feel that the institutions of higher learning are serving somebody besides them and not telling what they're furious. And having traveled around the country, let me say this, Americans are great. Like, we live in San Francisco and we think, people in San Francisco are nice, but people in the other parts of the country aren't nice. People in the other parts of the country are great. They're really nice. They are also patriotic Americans. They also care about the country. They also care about their families. Everyone is mad at what is perceived as corrupt elites rigging the system for themselves against normal people. That's what's going on. So when they go after, every one of these and try and shrink the government, they're also going after their political enemies, of course. And, obviously, I think there is a different, much better way to respond to this. But the underlying point is American citizens are very, very angry and disconnected from their government. That includes Californians, that includes San Franciscans. Look at what this city has done in terms of our government in the last 4 years. Look at the data. What's going on in this country is a sense of being abandoned by very, very powerful, very concentrated self-interested special interests.
How do you put that right? Like, how do you, I mean, you fix the government. How do you, like if you had a project 2029 that was going to be a blueprint for what we do next, like what would it look like?
I think there's a whole, when we look at why there's such income inequality, when we look at why there is, people feel as if they're not treated as full human beings, when we look at why people are worried about whether their kids or themselves are going to progress, there are real reasons. And it's not just wickedness. It's not, this is a world which has changed in terms of what kinds of businesses grow in the United States successfully, what kinds of businesses create value and jobs. So everyone hates when I say this, so I'm gonna prepare you to hate this. If you go back through 2000 and you look and see what are the companies that have grown up in the United States, they're all information companies. It's Google, it's Facebook, it's Amazon, it's Apple, it's NVIDIA. Every one of these companies is an information company. If you look at the companies that traditionally were big in the United States of America, they're companies that did physical stuff.
Yeah.
US Steel, Boeing, General Motors, Exxon, big things you can touch. And those are really different in terms of how they distribute value. So that if we started Facebook and it's like, now we need to add 1 million new customers today. Okay, done. Push a button. No cost, huge margins, and the money all goes to the top. We want to sell 1 million more cars at GM. Okay, we got to buy some land. We got to build a factory. We got to hire a bunch of people. It's a thing. It's a whole society move. And so when we think about how this has happened, it isn't just people being mean. People are the same as they always were. Business people have always been trying to make money. That's what business does. What's happened is the nature of business has changed. What drives business has changed. And the way that the money gets distributed has changed. So when you ask me, Malcolm, how do I think about that? Here's what I say. The thing that I am opposed to is the idea that you make your own money. That, I started a company and that money was mine and I created the company, and so to heck with everybody else, that's me. That is not true. Just to be clear, there is a system in the United States that goes back to at least 1215 in Runnymede. And that is a system that has been built by millions of people who got nothing for it. And that is the system that enables every one of these things to happen. The schools, the laws, everything that happens here has millions of mostly poor, uneducated people sacrificing. And so nobody made their own money. They always had the springboard of a system that was built over centuries. And so when we think about how that should get distributed, let's remember how many poor, dedicated kids went out and made that happen.
Yeah, I think we started the whole conversation by talking about how things have changed from when we were children, and that is one of the huge things that's changed is that there was a middle class. There were the public schools in San Francisco were strong, and you offered you a great chance. Proposition 13 hadn't really been invented yet, and so there really were a lot more public goods.
And when you think about how we're going to succeed, we are in an information world, which means we're in an education world, which means that we're going to have to succeed together by supporting each other, educating each other, enabling each other, and sharing. And I know that sounds like such a bunch of hokum, like who wants to do that? I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, but anyone who's a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist has to recognize there is a framework that enables it. And that framework has been built by everyone. And so everyone has got to be part of that. And that means that's how we have to think about the world going forward. Is like, if we're going to succeed in this world, we have to prepare ourselves to succeed and compete in this world. We have to be able to do well as a country and as a people, and we have to accept each other and make that happen. That is I'll give you a very simple fact. So in 1970, Ohio and Massachusetts had the same income per person. Ohio used to be the richest state in the United States. That's why all those presidents came from Ohio. They were really rich. They were great at farming. They were great at manufacturing. There are a ton of great colleges in Ohio, by the way. In 1970, Massachusetts said, we're going to be the best education. We're going to have the best education system in the United States. And that's Republicans, Democrats. If you look and see, the governors have gone back and forth, but everybody was dedicated to education. Ohio said, we're going to have low taxes. We're going to not do services. What really drives business is low income taxes. We're going to do that. So 50 years later, Massachusetts has 50% higher income per person than Ohio. When you look at what works in this world, it's honestly educating people and giving them a chance to create things. Because the difference between wanting to be in oil and gas and wanting to be in information is the difference between thinking, I'm going to own something and make money off owning something. I have oil and gas. Or I'm going to do something really well, and that's going to create real value. And if you look at this world, Exxon, just so you know, is worth $500 billion. It's a lot of money. Exxon's been around, at least 120 years, probably 150 years, back to John D. Rockefeller the first. NVIDIA is worth $3 trillion. It's been around about 20 years. 6 times as much value. They're doing something. If you look at the people who own oil and gas in the world, Russia has a lot of oil and gas. They have an incredibly low income per person. Venezuela has the 3rd most oil and gas in the world. They're incredibly poor. Saudi Arabia has 1/10 as many people and much more oil and gas than we do. And they're not half our GDP per capita. When we think about what we have to do, and when you say, what do we look for? We have to think about what we do, not what we own. And what we do and how we prepare ourselves to be productive, and that has so many positive side effects as well. Do you really want to live in Russia, even if you were rich? Do you want to move to Venezuela or Saudi Arabia? Is that the pattern of a country that we aspire to? I don't think so. What we have to do, Americans are doers. That's who we are. That's what we have to be. That's where we excel. And that's how we have to think about ourselves, and that's what we have to produce.
Yeah. How do you think, we're only like 2 months into this presidential administration. I think everybody's just so shell-shocked because every day there's such profound changes. But when you step back a little bit and you do think about what life is going to be like after this, how do we begin to be, what you're talking about in a way is becoming a less individualistic society in terms of being able to, Elon Musk would not have been a success in the way that he was in the United States if he'd only lived in Rwanda.
Or South Africa. Where he's from.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah. But so how do we begin to like nurture those institutions, like our educational institutions? How do we begin to kind of move away from that sense of just like everything that I deserve, I own, and instead of recognizing that there's a more of a communal element to generating wealth, to making society great?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is we are not going back. The idea that we're going to go back to 2015, 2012, 2000, 1980, 1965, no. We are going to go forward. And I think when you think about the profound things that are changing very fast in this society, one of them is about democracy, and one of them is about the economy. And they're related, but they're not the same thing. And what I was my experience as someone who is an investor in the energy transition, in terms of new energy generation and new technologies is really people are interested in outcomes. They really are. And even people who you would think are overwhelmingly interested in process and the environment aren't. They say they are, and they do care, but investors care about money. And the country cares about money. And people care about their ability to pay the bills, their ability to have health care, send their kids to school, all those things. So when we look at this administration, there's what's going on in terms of democracy, which is obviously a test, and there's a huge, huge conflict going on between two different versions of how to run a society. They're at stark odds, and there is a new front opened in that fight almost every single day. Secondly, what's going on in terms of economics is also profoundly important for the future of America. When we think about why America has become such a dominant country in all ways, it's like we think of ourselves as we're militarily really important, we're philosophically really important, we're economically really important. In every way, we're important. We have also won every revolution for over 100 years. We won the Industrial Revolution. We won the Information Revolution. We have been at the forefront of change, and California's been at the forefront of change for a really long time. And so when we think about economically, how is this going to work for us? If we're going through profound change economically, which we are, if we aren't at the forefront of that, we will not have the same leadership position in any sphere. We will not have the leadership position economically. We will not have the leadership position in any other part of this world. We will still be obviously a really important country. But for us to do what we've done, we have to be on the cutting edge. We have to be competing. We have to be thinking through strategically. And we have a better system. We have a better system. I'm a huge believer in democracy because I believe 320 million Americans are smarter than anybody. And you put the smartest 5 people in a room, 320 million Americans are 1,000,000 times smarter. And that's also how capitalism works. Everybody gets to vote with their money. So they make decisions on a dispersed basis with much more information about their own needs. And that is a much better system than any centralized government.
So how do we get to that? Basically,
that's what we've done. That's why we've been doing so well for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah.
Let's not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. So basically the statistics you gave us about energy transitions, electric vehicles in Europe and China, so how do we, this is the new revolution. So how do we move from our position of being behind to leading again?
I think, the other thing that's true in this world is people do cheat. When people are, if you follow international trade, people do cheat in international trade in a number of ways. They do. And they close markets to us, and they try and, steal information, and they try and subsidize things and dump in the United States. All of that is true. And those are things that's why we have a World Trade Organization to try very ineffectively to solve that. That's true. Let's just stipulate, I promise it's true. But on the other hand, can we ever compete and win internationally if we're not willing to compete head-to-head with the best? I always say to people, I love playing sports. If you're not willing to play basketball against the best basketball players, you will not be a great basketball player, full stop. If you are not willing to play soccer against the best soccer players from Brazil, Germany, and around the world, you will not be a great soccer player. You have to compete against the best to be the best. And so for us to withdraw and try and make it possible for us to have our own market and not compete and prevent other people from having access, that is not a long-term strategy for us. Now, I stipulate that people do not play fair in international trade, and that is something we should address aggressively and straightforwardly. But long-term, if we have to come up with new ways of manufacturing. Everyone likes to think in the United States, oh, these people just have, cheap workers. American workers are great, just so you know. American workers are really productive, most productive people in the world, work harder than anybody else. That's not true. We are going to have to be in the forefront of new ways of manufacturing. We're going to have to be in the forefront of every single one of the technologies we compete in and be pushing all the time. And if we don't do that, we will not win. And if we're not willing to compete head to head, we will not win. And and since when have Americans decided not to compete? That is not us. We're super competitive. And that's why I love that. So I don't feel that's bad at all. I think we have to get back to that idea that, hey, we are going to compete with everybody. We are going to go head to head with the Chinese. We are going to beat them.
So, in cheaper, faster, better, you talk about just geothermal, you talk about nuclear, wind, solar. Could you talk a little bit about those technologies and just how they're changing, what they're looking like? What's the future mix of different ways of generating electricity?
So this is, I don't want to be too boring, so I'll try and just be a little boring.
So far, you're not at all boring. We're all on the edge of our seats in here.
When you think about energy and you think about everything's going to be electrified.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. We're electrifying everything. So when you think about electricity, there are two kinds of electricity. There's intermittent electricity, that's solar and wind. It's not always sunny, it's not always breezy. So what do you do if you want to have a refrigerator on 24/7, 365, if it has to be sunny or breezy? So there's intermittent and there's base load. And all of the arguments around fossil fuels and natural gas are around base load, because it's always there. It's there, and you can heat it up fast. And that's the argument for natural gas. That's the argument for coal. That's the argument for diesel. They're all physical things that you can do. When we look at the new tech, solar's cheaper right now. Solar and wind are cheaper than natural gas or coal right now, and it'll go down another 80% this decade. It's much cheaper. Batteries are the way you turn intermittent into base load. Normal utility grade batteries right now last 4 hours. So they're important, but if you're going to have a bad week, they're not that helpful. If you want to be 24/7, 365, we could go into who actually needs that. But just so you know, batteries are not only going to become 80% cheaper this decade, they will be multiples longer in duration. People are talking about seasonal batteries. That is now baseload. Wow. That is solar, wind plus batteries will be baseload. Okay, that's one thing that's going to happen. Second thing that's going to happen, geothermal is going down into the earth and getting hot water and steam and using that for energy. Think Old Faithful. Traditionally, it's been very low percentage of electricity, about 2%, because there aren't that many Old Faithfuls. Basically, the old technology, you go down 500 feet, that was geothermal. New technology, go down 5,000 to 10,000 feet. Much more geothermal. People think that could be 15% of electricity generation, which is a ton.
Wow.
Cheap, clean, using oil and gas technology, oil and gas rigs to go down there and get it. That is happening. How fast and how clean, I'm not sure. People love to talk about nuclear. There are two different kinds of nuclear. The one that people really want to have happen is nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is recreating the sun, literally. 100 million degrees. That's what nuclear fusion is, 100 million degrees. I asked the guy who runs the biggest fusion company, how do you control that? What kind of container do you put that in?
Yeah, right. What kind of box do you have it in?
There is no material that you can put in the sun that does not disintegrate immediately. It's 100 million degrees. He said, oh no, you control it with a magnetic field. I was like, ooh, it's a very tough engineering problem, obviously. I could go into funny stories about how tough it is. But one of the things about engineering problems is human beings have to do them, and they're very hard. And people have been working on this problem for decades, and there's still a lot to do. And there was a story that they created nuclear fusion in France last month for 22 seconds. Home run, 22 seconds. So it sounds like a long way to go. Well, there's this new thing that helps us with engineering called artificial intelligence,
Yeah, right.
which means that from the ability to speed up the amount of engineering thinking and reps that we do, there's now an ability to do that at a completely different pace. So when I say we're going to have abundant, cheap, clean energy, we really are. I mean, I just gave you 3 things that can be huge producers of very cheap, clean energy all over the world. And, you know, the pace with which that's going to happen, I can be reasonably granular about the cost of solar, of wind, of batteries, about the decline curve they're on in terms of technology. I can be reasonably thoughtful about how much it's going to cost to do geothermal because, you know, we're invested in those things. Fusion is like, you know, that is the holy grail. If they can get that, that is almost limitless. I mean, you've created the sun. It's kind of all the energy anyone could ever want, ever, forever. But it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
But in all of that, the answer is not going to be
drill more gas wells.
You know, old dinosaurs.
Yeah.
The cost of fossil fuels for the last 100 years, controlled for inflation, is flat. Old dinosaurs don't get more productive. There's no technology that, you know, helps the brontosaurus at this point.
So one of the things you mentioned was artificial intelligence, and I wanted to ask you about that too. You know, I think it's changing so much. It's changing culture. It's changing how we as preachers write sermons. At first we thought, oh, these computers.
He's cheating on his sermons. I want to just break this to you guys.
These computers, they sound like they you know, you could never have a computer write a sermon. And yeah, the sermons that computers write are terrible. But you know, it's really helpful if you say, hey, you know, in Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics, what page is his discussion of redemption having to do with Luke chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. That is a lot more helpful. So how do you say it changing, like us culturally, not just technologically, but in other ways too?
So I'll give you one instance, just so you can wrap your mind, that helped me wrap my mind around where this is leading a little bit. So, you know, we rebuilt the Bay Bridge. And so in order to rebuild the Bay Bridge, we hired Bechtel, you know, a famous Bay Area engineering firm. We paid them $200 million to design a new Bay Bridge, which is beautiful.
It was worth it.
Is incredible. $200 million. So there is a company started by a couple who've started a couple other information companies together that is basically using artificial intelligence to do engineering, which they describe as moving Legos around. That's how complicated they believe engineering is. And they said, okay, I said, well, how does that look in terms of the Bay Bridge? They said, we could redesign the Bay Bridge right now for $20 million.
Wow.
Not $200 million. And the 20 is going to 2.
Yeah, right.
So when you think about it, right now, and I see this in other companies, you know, you can look at something that is doing back office response, mostly done out of call centers in India, right? So right now, AI, call center response, now used just off artificial intelligence right now, you can save 75%. It is 10 times faster. It is 97% accurate, which is pretty much what human beings are in call centers. Human beings are good, but every one of those numbers is going to get better. If they're saving 75%, that will certainly go up a lot. 10 times faster, it's going to be pretty much instantaneous, and the accuracy will only grow. So when we think about what artificial intelligence looks like, this is a dramatic change in how we do intellectual work in our society.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, it is profound, and it is moving at a pace that, I mean, no one really knows, because all predictions about the future are predictions, not facts. But there's people who say, just to give you a number in your head, There are people who say we'll have artificial superior intelligence, so better than humans, by Jan 1, 2027. So it's whether that's right or wrong, whether it's 27 or 29, is irrelevant from the standpoint of society. Things are changing really fast.
Well, I can't wait to meet one of those AI theologians. So one of the traditions we have at the forum is we take questions for our guests, and so if you have questions, Rebecca will collect them. Sally Bingham, who we all love, I mean, she's so great, started Interfaith Power and Light here in San Francisco. So, when you think of churches and congregations, how can they become climate organizations? How can we become climate people collectively and make a difference? Like, when you imagine that, what do you think?
Let me say, what I have said, which I think is true, but which I'm not happy about, is this. In America right now, the only thing we can talk about is money.
Yeah.
It's all the only thing people can hear is money. I mean, if you think about all the political discourse, it really revolves around money. Obviously, that is not the society any of us wants to live in.
Yeah.
Because we all have values that are deeper. We all have things that we care about more. Nobody thinks that that is the measure of a human life. I mean, I think everybody needs to pay the bills, and everybody, wants to succeed and care for their family and have a fun, productive life. But there's certainly a lot more to life than money.
Yeah.
And when we think about what we're trying to create as a country or as a family or as individuals or as a community like Grace Cathedral, we have to ask ourselves what we're trying to create in addition to what we're trying to have.
Yeah.
And when I think about the purpose of what we're trying to do, or when I think about my own life, I want to feel like I've helped to work on creating a better world and preserving the beautiful parts of the world that I love and make it possible for everyone's kids and everybody's grandkids to enjoy those same beautiful things, which of course involve the natural world and the ability to be sustained and be part of the greater world. And so to me, I don't know how this will happen, how we will preserve God's earth. But I know that we have to do that, both, from a common sense, practical standpoint, but also more than that, from a sense of values and love and sense of who we are as people and how we fit into the broader universe. And I think that for us as a society to remember those things about ourselves, which are really deep and rooted in how we see ourselves in the broadest sense, is what, spirituality, God, belief are all about, to put us in a bigger context than just our K1s.
Yeah.
And, that is something that as a people and as a country we need to have if we're going to be making good decisions and making the decisions that make us happy and fulfilled. Everybody knows doing something for someone else is what makes people happy. We've got to remind ourselves about that.
Yeah, I love what you say. I mean, there's like a dehumanizing tendency that we see in society, and churches and synagogues and mosques are part of that humanizing part. We're trying to see the inherent value, the dignity of every human being, apart from that world. I like that. So here's our questions. Our current administrations are, oh gosh, this is like written as large as someone could write, and I still can't read it. Okay, our current automotive companies are not aligned with innovation. Do we need new transportation companies, and what kind? Oh, great question.
So if you look at, I guess we're going to talk car companies for a second. Car companies, very tough business. If you look at the United States in 1900, there are probably 180 car companies. Of those 180 car companies, one of them hasn't gone bankrupt, which is Ford Motor Company. All the others have gone bankrupt. If you look at China right now, there are probably 180 car companies. Are they all going to go bankrupt? Maybe BYD won't, but it's a really tough business. And when you look at the car companies now, and you look at the, what people see, I know that Tesla is, a very volatile stock and a very volatile company in terms of results. But if we're going to compete, we're going to have companies that embrace new technologies. And, I'll give my plug for California right now. The car company that succeeded in the 21st century in the United States of America was a California company. And it was an engineering company. And it was a new technology company. And it was one where people were breaking with the past and trying to focus on what will work in the future. It is really, really, really hard for an existing status quo company to lead a revolution in their own business. And if you look at a car company, think about it this way. GM probably makes $10,000 profit for every SUV.
Wow.
They were probably losing $2,000 per every EV. Who stops doing a business where you make $10,000 a whack for a business where you lose $2,000 a whack? I mean, that makes no sense, right? That's why it's so hard for an existing company to make the transition to a new technology. It's really hard. And if you think about it, that's just a little box with no human beings involved. If we're working at GM, the people who run the SUV part have built the company. They've put their careers into it. They've done great work. They've succeeded internationally in creating this. Are you just going to take if you were running the company, you're just going to take those people and throw them out the window? It's very hard. So when we think about how who's going to succeed in this, who is willing to actually embrace the new technologies? Because it's not nice, but that is how the cliche about capitalism is creative destruction. Creative destruction. You create, you destroy. And that's how it works. And it is a ruthless way of getting to the best answers for society, but it's very tough within organizations. And to make those transitions, you have to be, very straightforward, and it's hard. So do I think that the new companies, I will say Mary Bear is probably the best big three auto CEO in my lifetime, and we'll see how she does.
Yeah. If solving climate crisis requires trillions of dollars of investment, where will that come from? Public markets are incented to maximize short-term profits, and the current administration is similarly focused.
So let me say this. Capitalist money comes to make it for good investments. That's why I said cheaper, faster, better. I don't believe that the people who are going to bet on yesterday's technologies are going to get good returns, because I think they're going to be trying to push something that's more expensive, slower, and worse. And so when I think about investment, people are going to invest because they think they're going to get good returns. That's the reason. And if they don't think they're going to get good returns, they're not going to invest. So when we think about this, what we're trying to get is a level playing field. Okay, you bring your best, we bring our best, let's see who's better. That is how this is going to work. And so I think the idea that public markets are only interested in short-term profits, I don't think that's true. I think that people have to be thinking not just how do we have a good year in 2025, they have to be thinking how is 25 going to lead us to a better year in 26, 27, 28, 29, and on? How are we going to build real capability? That's capitalism. It's not just like we're going to have a great year and then we're going to go bust. That is a terrible idea. Terrible. You have to ask, how are we going to build something of enduring value where every year we get better, every year we produce more value, every year people want to buy our stuff more.
Okay, here's the next question. Thank you, Tom, for your brilliant perspective.
I wrote this question.
It's definitely not your handwriting. I know who wrote this question. With 7 protests in 2 months, hundreds of phone calls to legislators, what impactful grassroots work can we all do day to day for democracy now?
So I think that in terms of organizing for democracy now, I think what we need to be doing is focusing on places where we not only want to make change, but can succeed in making change, and what that looks like. We have to win. We have to succeed in doing things we believe in. And whether that is a specific electoral race, whether that is a specific legal challenge, whether that is an idea that we want to push some way through a proposition, I think it's important if we're going to make, for anybody in democracy, to use the democracy to actually have wins, to show that we're not just talking, we're actually accomplishing something real that we believe in, and hopefully people broadly across our society agree with us in. And so when I think about I think we have to have a vision of what we're trying to create, and I think we have to then figure out ways where we can actually have real world practical impact that will help people, that will show not just what we stand for, but how we stand for it, and that there is a vision here behind it. Look, when you think about what's going on, the question is, okay, we've had two political parties for a couple hundred years. Okay, I think the Republican Party has changed dramatically, almost on its head, what they stand for. And I think there's a real question within the Democratic Party of what is the vision? What are the values? What are the ideas? What are we trying to create? And I think that it's really important as we go forward, both to have an idea of what that is and practically what does that look like. Because I think when I said people are mad at what they view as corrupt, self-interested elites, that's true. And the question is, what are we trying to create that is good for human beings in this society right now that is about them and not about the people who, feel like they're making decisions? And people are feel very disconnected from that. And you could go through a million reasons why that's true, but it is true.
So here's another question. What happened to the projects that were planned for the Biden Infrastructure Act? What was the money spent for?
So there were a bunch of different infrastructure-related projects, and a lot of the money never got allocated. And of the money that did get allocated, the Trump administration is trying to pull a bunch of it back. But, to a very large extent, there was a broad-based sense that we had to rebuild infrastructure in this country, which, by the way, is true. We do need, I think everybody knows, it's hard to build infrastructure in the United States of America because there's so many permits required and so many approvals required and so many people who get to weigh in that, I'll give you two examples. I have a friend who had the biggest wind farm in the United States in Wyoming, and he built a electric grid from Wyoming to California so he could sell his power here, and he sold it last year. It took him 18 years. And I said, and he sold it at a good price. It was successful. I said, would you do that again? He said, I'd rather put my eyes out. And I have another friend who, from a different vantage point, did the same thing from New Mexico to California, who said it took him 16 years. So when we think about what's going on this is a country which has not been good at doing infrastructure. And we all know it, that's just been true because it's a very slow. Do I think that that is something that we're gonna have to speed up? Yes, but yes, I do. I think that our permitting process needs a very substantial revamp, absolutely. But beyond that, there's a sense that the way that we're going to build new infrastructure is by doing it the same way we did it in 1950. We need more electric distribution capacity, so we need to build another grid. Not true. That is not true. If in the Midwest, AES, a huge utility, wanted to increase the carrying capacity of their grid by 50%, they did it with sensors and software. It cost $48,000 per mile to rebuild the grid in the same place. Would have cost $600,000 per mile. Would have taken 2 years of shutdowns. So what we are going to have to do is use new technologies that didn't exist in 1950 to create the new capacity in the existing footprint. Is that possible? Yes. Absolutely. The grid, to use an example that I've been using, is 31.8% efficient. And that's just, that's terrible. Could we take that from 31.8 to 41.8? Easily. Is it going to be a huge computational engineering chore? Yes. Can we do that? Yes. Do I think that's going to happen? Yes. Do I think it's going to stop at 41.8%? No. There's new superconducting materials that lets the grid hold 5 to 10 times as much electricity. Was that available in 1950? No. We are have new solutions for today's problems, not yesterday's solutions for today's problems. New solutions. We're going to have to think in new ways, and they're going to work. So when we think about what we're going to produce, it's going to be new. It's going to be surprising for a couple of weeks, and then we're going to assume it's always been there. That's how technology works.
Well, I can't believe how fast our time together has gone. I wanted to ask you a lot about just how President, the last election season, and I had a lot of questions about President Biden. We just never got to all that. But, we just have to save that for the next time. But this has been so, and you really, every time I talk with you about these things, we have a one-on-one conversation. I feel like I see so much more deeply into the future, and I feel like all of us felt like that today. So thank you very much. I wouldn't stop, except that I have to be preaching in like 23 minutes.
So let me say one thing. Let me just say one thing. First of all, thank you very much. Of course, I love Malcolm. I know we all love Malcolm. I also will say, this is going to be so much better than people think. So much better. I mean, I think looking at the people, and I listed a bunch of people who I'm very close to in this audience. What we're going to be able to do is going to be terrific. And we are going to create things in our lifetimes that are so much better than people imagine. And that is going to go for us here in Northern California and across the country, but around the world. We are really creating something much better, and people take their eyes off that ball all the time and think about the problems we have. If we don't destroy the natural world, we are going to have a better life for everyone on this planet than we can imagine. And so let's please not destroy the natural world along the way. Because
it actually brings me right to our next forum guest is Sheila Warren, who's involved in blockchain technology, internet. Like the way the internet can be improved is just extraordinary. We talk about percentage efficiency. I feel like we're at a 17% internet. We could be at a 37% internet, but she'll be here to talk about that next week at 9:30 on the forum. I encourage you to buy Tom's book. I also encourage you to come upstairs to church afterwards for the choral Eucharist at 11. You could hear the men and boys practicing. It's going to be so beautiful. We rely on your support for every gift. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. Tom, what a blessing it is to see you.
Nice
and thank you so much for this time this morning.